Welcome aboard the USS Aeronome. To become a member of our crew, please visit perfectorganism.com/support. As a patron of Perfect Organism, you'll receive exclusive perks and early access to content. Incoming audio transmission received. Please proceed to Subdeck 3 to begin playback. Thank you, and welcome aboard.
All right, sweethearts, what are you waiting for? Breakfast in bed? Another glorious day in the Corps. Day in the Marine Corps is like a day on the farm. Every meal's a banquet. Every paycheck a fortune. Every formation a parade. I love the Corps.
Where's Basket? Let's rock!
Welcome to Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast. I'm your host, Jaime and Patrick, and I am joined by host
Patrick Green.
So thanks everyone for listening today. This is another entry into our series, 40 Miles of Bad Road. We're kind of getting close to the end of this series. This is a big year for us. We haven't really had a formal episode recording since Patrick and I met up and we went to the exhibit, the 40 Years of Alien exhibit at USC, which was awesome. Got some great video. We got a lot of photographs. We've shared a lot of that with you guys. But we're kind of moving along. We're into March 2019. It's, again, the 40-year anniversary of Alien. And there's a lot coming up. Alien Day is coming up. But we wanted to kind of slowly wrap this series up as we kind of get ready for our next series, which is The Forbidden Planet, 40 Years of Alien. But today we wanted to discuss whether or not Aliens is overrated, but really talk about that in depth and what that means. That's going to be from creative decisions that James Cameron made to how the sequel is looked upon by kind of the populace. Does it hurt the film that it's so popular? So those are just a couple of things that we're going to discuss. Patrick.
A little bit of light controversy. So let's get a couple things out of the way. One, Jamie and I have already established many times that we absolutely love this movie. So we're going to be looking for new ways to argue about it tonight. But keep in mind, this is kind of getting this disclaimer out of the way that we do love the movie. That's not to say necessarily that it's not overrated. But this conversation comes from a place of love, so we don't have to feel like we have to justify it every time we talk about it.
I say we grease this rat fuck son of a bitch right now.
Just doesn't make any goddamn sense.
And one other thing I wanted to mention is that we agreed that because we want to be able to move on and because we have some stuff already recorded that we're just too excited to share with you guys, that we do want to start transitioning to our next series. But we're going to be coming back to this one. So we're going to have at least one more episode after this in this current series. And then as time goes on and as months and years go by, when we have Aliens-specific content, it's still going to be part of 40 Miles of Bad Road. There are still Alien 3 episodes that we want to get to at some point that will fit into our Alien 3 series.
And there's the whole idea of the discussion of the score for Aliens, which I think is the weakest score in the trilogy, to be honest with you. I think the score is very derivative. I don't think it's good. I think it's bombastic. I don't think it's bad. I just don't think it's that unique.
I think it's a mixed
Commence tomato throwing,
mixed
that's
bag.
fine.
I think it's a mixed bag. To be fair, James Horner wrote it in about 35 minutes too, which I think is part of the problem.
That's true.
So we will come back to this, and this is not the end of our 40 Miles of Bad Road, but it's a chance to kind of stop and to switch gears a little bit with the knowledge that we will come back to it. So don't worry, we are coming back to it, but we're going to do one more after this, and then we're done. So before we get into the conversation about whether or not it's overrated, I thought it'd be fun to take a step back for a second and look at where we've been, because we've traveled down this road pretty far and covered a lot of ground. So I'm going to kind of run through just some of the things that we've talked about. And keeping in mind that one of the first things that we ever said in episode 93, which was the first 40 Miles of Bad Road show, was we discussed whether or not this film is overrated, because it's something it's taken for granted how good it is, and because of that, it's an easy thing to sort of take pot shots at, because it feels like it's sort of like this indomitable beast of a film. And a lot of the time, films that become like that, films that become sort of unimpeachable, are also actually worse than we give them credit for, but their kind of legacy has built up so much that it's hard to really take them apart. So part of our whole reason for this series, part of why I was excited about it and why I still am, is because we wanted to deconstruct this thing and make it less of just a myth and less of this sort of perfect monolithic thing, and make it back into a film that was made by real people with real assets in a real place and a real time. And I feel like we've kind of been doing that. So we wanted to revisit it now, having gone through months of this stuff, and have a conversation from a place where we're not looking at it just as this mythological thing anymore, and talk about whether or not, as a film, it's overrated. So going back to the beginning. So episode 93, we talked about where do you go after Alien? And we talked about what an audacious choice it was to take it in such a weird direction compared to the first film. And it was so divergent, and Alien had such a cultural impact. And it was fascinating that it immediately kind of went in this brave new world. And it set up a trend that we're going to unpack a little bit tonight that maybe has been problematic for other sequels. The next thing we talked about was Nuke the Site from Orbit, Finding James Cameron, which I think was one of the best titles of this whole thing. We talked about Cameron as a filmmaker, about how young he was, how unproven he was, and how, although he was the absolute perfect choice for that role, for that film, and that time, in that studio environment, there's like no way that anybody could have known that, and how miraculous it was that he ended up making such an amazing movie, given how inexperienced and young and unproven he was. And then we moved on to Who's Snow White, where we talked about the miracle of Ellen Ripley, and about how Ripley as a character really came into her own as the Ripley that we know and love her as in Aliens, and how she has become an icon in many ways, socially and culturally, as a result of that role, and how nuanced and how fascinating Sigourney Weaver's portrayal was, and also how well written the character was, just as a heroic, archetypal, new type of role for us to talk about. And then we moved on to episode 97. We had a spotlight with Bryant Dillon in the middle, and we had a roundtable called The Myth and the Magic of Aliens, where we had me, Jamie, Clara, Sean, Mike, and Connor on all at the same time, and had this crazy fun time kind of unpacking the impact of Aliens as a film and as a cultural artifact and as something in our lives. We talked a lot about how it was a movie that we fell in love with as kids, and how we've introduced it to our own kids and our own nieces and nephews, etc., and how it's more than just a movie, how it's really a part of the global cultural landscape. And then we moved on to episode 98, where we talked about the Queen. And I think this might be my favorite of the series so far, actually, because it was the one where this one was my idea. I kind of tossed it out there because I just love the idea of the Queen, and I think she's just such a cool design and represents such an interesting kind of shift. And then Jamie fucking started the episode off by saying he had issues with her. And I think the whole rest of the show was fun, because we were doing what we kind of set out to do in the first place, which is unpack these myths and look at it as real things, and kind of think about whether or not an idea is overrated. And I think some of the conversations that came out of that episode 98 are some of the most interesting ones that we've had. And then we had a spotlight with Clara, and then we had the 100th episode celebration. And then because the Queen episode went so well, we came back to it, and we had Clara, Connor, Sean, Dave, Michael, and Bryant Dillon on with us to talk about the Queen, and that was another very fun episode. And then we talked with Johnny Christmas. We did a review of Alien Blackout, and then just a few weeks ago we talked about how every character matters in Aliens, and how the way that the characters, the ways in which they're written, and the ways in which they have sort of entered into cinema history are so indelible and so interesting, and why some of the reasons for that are. And that's something that I really honestly think it's almost impossible to talk about that aspect of the film being overrated, because those characters, as we've established, are just absolutely amazing. And then we had our Dispelling Rumors minisode, and here we are tonight with episode 106, part 8 of 40 Miles of Bad Road, to talk about whether or not it's overrated.
Yeah, we got through a lot, but it's really been fun. It's really been a really great journey, and really, despite all of our kind of back and forth and maybe some challenges on our opinions or our ideas about what Aliens is or isn't, I've fallen back in love with the film, which I think is great. And certainly, it's the film I've seen the most of the trilogy. Even though Alien 3 is my favorite, it's hard for me to watch it. So I've just enjoyed 40 Miles. It's been such a fun ride. And thanks to everyone who's been on the show, Clara, Dave, Michael, Mike, Sean, and Connor, and just all of our team who've been there to talk about it with us, to give their opinions. Some of them were up at like 2 a.m. to be on the show. It's been really, really great. It's been a really fun time. And just to everyone who's listened, thank you so much for, again, giving us a place to kind of share with the community.
And also, like Inga, who's part of our team, who has not been on an episode yet, although we're going to have him on soon, hopefully, just finding such amazing behind-the-scenes photos. I feel like Aliens is one of those movies where, like, we have all watched the special features on every single DVD and Blu-ray set and digital download. We all own the ancillary documentary stuff. You would think at this point, we have the on-set photography books. You would think we would have seen everything, and yet somehow Inga finds these amazing images that, as far as I know, like, don't exist in printed form anywhere. They're just on the internet. And it's just incredible to think that this movie now that came out over 30 years ago is that there are still things, and a movie that you and I have probably seen a combined 500 times, to put it, conservatively.
Oh, yeah.
That there are still things about it that are surprising. I have to say, something I've loved about this series is the fact that, because just sort of as prep work for it, I've been watching it more frequently than I know. I mean, it's a movie that I already watched a lot anyway, but I've been watching it like weekly, during this thing. And part of why I've been doing that is because my kids have just become like absolutely fucking obsessed with it. And like I've been sending you pictures. I'm like, oh, look, guess what we're doing again? And the kids are just sitting there, with their pretend Colonial Marines backpacks and helmets on. And they're sitting there holding the Aliens, the Kenner toys, and watching the movie. And it's been absolutely wonderful. And this series has been a chance for me to, the kids have already sort of been inculcated in Alien stuff. We do the Alien Day stuff every year, and, they're already into it. But they've fallen in love with aliens the same way that I did as a young person. And I think I've really realized the power that the narrative and the characters and the effects have on, like, just the human spirit, that anybody at any stage of their life, my kids are 5 and 2, that they can fall madly enough in love with it that, like, it's something that they think about all the time. It's just amazing.
Yeah, it is. And by the way, for those who haven't seen Patrick's kids, he has 2 of the cutest boys I have ever seen. Oh my gosh, they're just the sweetest little things, and they love aliens. And he's been scaring them at the ages of 5 and 2 with xenomorphs and cursing. And chest
it's
bursting.
True. I do check it. I'm like, is it okay with you guys? And they're like, oh yeah, like, I'm scared, but I want to watch it again.
Yeah,
it's been because the movie is that good.
Yeah.
It's a movie. I have probably watched Aliens honestly 1,000 times. In my life. I've
probably watched Aliens 350 times at least.
I mean, I have no clue. Like, Froylan Gardner, our good friend, he and I, have hung out in real life before, and I've seen his house, which is covered in aliens shit. And he actually, he's an artist, and he just puts aliens on in the background almost every day while he produces his artwork for his job. So it's just always playing in the background, and he has never gotten tired of it,
Yeah, I know what that's like. I mean, I do that with certain movies, sometimes aliens, but oftentimes it's The Dark Crystal, which everyone knows. It's just one of those things where you're something that continues to inspire you creatively. But I say we jump right in. With this topic, and along the lines of what we're talking about in terms of the films that we were first introduced to, which is Aliens for both you and me. And then
no, not for me.
Oh, wait.
No.
I can't remember.
No, it was Alien, bitch.
Straight. Hey, Sarge, get liver cancer smoking
Corporal,
those.
I want this loading lock sealed now.
But after that, so it was Alien first, And then I was like, well, what's the next one about? And then I saw that, and I liked it 1,000 times more than Alien.
Yeah.
So I watched that all the time as a kid. And then as I kind of like grew up a little bit, I started falling in love with Alien more, which is still my favorite.
Yeah. Well,
but there was a time in my childhood where Aliens was something that I watched probably every single day after school. And it was like a guiding force in my life, and still is, to be honest.
Well, I think that there's something that's specific that I wanted to kind of bring to your attention and the attention of our listeners as I think about being introduced to Aliens first. I think me being introduced to Aliens first did a disservice to Alien. And I'm playing devil's advocate in this episode specifically. Again, and I don't know why I always feel like, or we always feel like we have to kind of say, we love this movie.
James.
Shut up.
Jamie fucking hates this movie.
I hate it.
You this is all you talk. You go, man, I still hate Aliens. I'm gonna tell you.
We gotta be a stranger.
No, let's just not say that anymore. People know that at this point. For one thing, we've done 9 fucking hours.
I know, but I just feel like
it is one of our favorite movies of all time.
We live in this time where people are so black and white about things. Like, if you don't love it, you hate it, and I can't stand.
But we
that.
don't hate it.
Yeah, we don't.
We don't hate it. We both love the movie. Let's
But-
not say it anymore.
but-
You fucking hate it. Go ahead.
But as I, when Alien 3 rolled around, and it took me about a year after its release to see it, because everyone knows I wasn't able to see it at the time, Alien 3 stood out to me as something wholly unique. And there was some mirroring of Alien in Alien 3, but it was a completely new story, completely new setting. Everything that we were familiar with was gone. As I look at Aliens, the bones of the story, we have Sigourney Weaver, Ripley, waking up 57 years later, floating in space. Of course, it's a very different kind of opening. She wakes up on Gateway Station. Although, funny enough, I think about Interstellar and Cooper. He kind of has a similar ending where he wakes up after being floating in space for very long. I don't know why that just came into my head. Anyways, little anecdote there. But so Ripley is then taken back to, they kind of convince her to go back to LV-426, which is the movie from the first, the planet from the first movie.
The moon from the first movie.
The moon, whatever. It didn't have a name, but of course in Aliens it does have a name. But what strikes me about Aliens is that eventually towards the last third of the film, it starts to beat for beat repeat things that we've seen in Alien. And even though he does it wonderfully, every beat is a reflection of a beat we've seen before, where there's a countdown happening. Ridley has to go, instead of going back to the ship, she's going back into the atmosphere processor. Instead of getting Jonesy, she's getting Newt. And of course there's this countdown. She meets an alien. She's got to run away from the alien, just like in Aliens. She eventually escapes in this little narcissist-like pod, which is the drop ship, or a different drop ship. Just when she thinks she's fine, the alien's on board. There's a battle, and she blows it out into space. And also
blows up the, just like the Nostromo blew up. She blows up all of the colony too. Yeah.
And to be honest with you, I think that there's a couple of different things happening with Aliens. I think in terms of supporting characters, which we've discussed on the episode, I think those characters are wholly unique and different, and just they have never been equaled yet. They're amazing. In terms of characters, Alien stands apart as a new ensemble of people that don't seem familiar. They're not Parker, Lambert, Ash, Dallas. They're very different from them. They don't have much in common, except for they're people who are kind of in this job and they got to do a job. But they have a bigger kind of global outlook. Aside from that, I feel like the more I see Aliens, the more glaring James Cameron's repetition from Alien stands out to me. And I want to make another specific note. As I've gotten older, as we get older, we see these filmmakers who are now our age who are making movies, and a lot of those filmmakers end up telling similar stories of films that they'd loved before, whether it's J.J. Abrams kind of retelling A New Hope, or Quentin Tarantino retelling other films that he's seen before that he loves. Now, this doesn't mean that their films are bad. It doesn't mean it's not a bad or good thing, but I feel like James Cameron, in a way, relied too heavily upon the beats of a film that we've seen before, and I think it hurts the film a little bit. Now, it only hurts the film in my perspective because we're always looking at it and talking about it and breaking it down. So maybe that's just something that's synonymous with me or us. The more we talk about it, the more we break it down, it's going to kind of look different to us. It's like when you go and dissect something, you open up a person, they're not going to look like a person. They're going to look like their arteries, their veins, their all of it's going to look very, very different. But I just really feel like part of the film is not aging as well because it's so derivative in some portions to Alien.
All right, we waste him.
It's funny because when I watch the movie, there are things that like I can obviously see as being parallel, but because the tone of it is so different and because the pace of it is so different, it never really kind of bothers me. But I think it's worth noting that the sort of the final third, I guess both movies are in 4 acts, but we'll say the third act of Alien and the third act of Aliens, which are both pretty similar, like, in terms of story beats, like you're mentioning, is basically are the same as Jaws, right? Because, like, if you think about, like, after Quint's story about the Indianapolis when they're on the Orca, the shark kind of comes back out of nowhere, smashes the boat, and so because of that, the Orca starts sinking. So it's just like when in Alien, the Nostromo is overheating and it's getting prepared to self-destruct, right? At the last 10 minutes of the Nostromo's life. And just like in Aliens, how the entire terraforming station is blowing up, right? Like, it's the same thing. So things are falling apart, the boat's sinking, and then in the midst of that, the monster returns, right? So in Jaws, the shark comes back, kills Quint. It starts dragging what's left of the boat around, and then in Alien, the big chap comes, all of a sudden shows up while Ripley's going back to get Jonesy, and all of a sudden it's like in the same space. And then likewise in Aliens, the Queen shows up, and that adds this whole extra layer of complication. So like while the boat is sinking, or the Nostromo's overheating, or the terraforming station on Acheron is blowing up, you have like the big baddie kind of coming back for more. And then all three of them end, in Jaws, the shark Bruce actually explodes. The Nostromo explodes, and Hadley's Hope explodes. And I think that I think it's worth pointing out that there are certain tropes in action horror thrillers that work so well that you can kind of put any story on them and they will function in a narrative context, I think, really effectively. Now, the reason why I think I don't hold that against Aliens is because I think it serves almost a necessary function, which is Aliens is such a divergence from Alien in so many different ways, right? We talk about that a lot, about the audacity of having this complete recontextualization where you go from being, unarmed and alone in a haunted house to being colonial Marines fighting, for freedom and hope in the galaxy and against hordes and hordes of endless xenomorphs, right? There's a huge tonal shift that happens there. And I think that if Aliens had a more divergent plot in terms of the story beats that it had, I think it would be too far away from Alien to feel like a sequel. I think something about the arc that it takes, even down to in my opinion, the corniest aspect of it, which is the 4th act surprise Queen reemergence, I think it works because it makes it feel like an echo of the first film in a way that it sort of hadn't before that. Even though there are other things like, instead of Distress Beacon, they're going back to LV-426 to investigate the colonist situation, blah, blah. But,
yeah, it's like the antithesis of a Distress Beacon. They're not hearing anything, so now they got to go back.
Yeah, right. It's like the absence of a Distress Beacon. Exactly. Yeah. Right. So but the idea being they're drawn not only even just to any place, but to the same exact LV-426, the same moon. I do think that there are sort of facsimile aspects to it, but I actually think that they work in the favor of the film, personally.
Well, actually, as you've been talking, I've had some clarity, I think. Maybe what could be even affecting my opinion about Aliens is the fact that we've had that trope. Like, well, first of all, I think when Alien premiered in 1979, that the idea that the monster's not dead, it's still here, it was relatively new for then. But, fast forward 40 years later, how many scary films have we seen where they think they've killed him? He's not dead, or it's not dead. It's coming back. It's here with you. We've seen it over.
But to be fair, again, just in Jaws 4 years earlier, you had the tiger shark that was caught halfway through. And
but it was still somewhat new. Like these were even like that summer blockbuster fair was this new phenomenon that was happening. So it's not like people were going to movies every summer and seeing the same trope. These tropes were new. It wasn't happening. Alien was a film. Yes, in Jaws there was something similar going on there, but it was still very singular to that experience. And Alien did it in its own way. So it wasn't like, oh, we've seen this before. Whereas nowadays, when we see a film that's a scary movie or a suspenseful film, or whether it's a monster film or a haunted house film or whatever, or a horror film, we expect that the end isn't the end, that they're gonna, Freddy's gonna come back, Jason's gonna come back 10 minutes before the film ends, or 3 minutes, and they're gonna have to kind of put that knife in its head one more time. So, and then if you
which I think is part of why actually a lot of newer like independent, or not even independent, but like horror movies like Hereditary or The Witch, or things that don't rely on those same beat patterns, I think are really effective. Or Get Out, movies that sort of follow a different, like they're frightening, but in the way that something like Rosemary's Baby is frightening, something that has like sort of a more gradual psychological.
I don't think Rosemary's Baby is frightening at all. In fact, I remember watching it thinking this is stupid.
I think the book is scary actually.
Yeah, I maybe have to read the book, but I just thought the movie was
the
ridiculous.
The movie, I don't think it's aged very well either. But my point being that it's and I guess that's it. So, well, here's another thing which we haven't talked about. James Cameron was very overt about this. And speaking of special features, he says this on Charles de Lauzirika's absolutely wonderful quadrilogy special features. He talks about how he set out to capture terror and not horror, right? So Alien was a horror experience, and Aliens from the beginning was a terror experience. And I think that the aspects of Alien that lend themselves to terror are the final act of the film, right? Where it becomes not this psychologically unsettling, gore-filled, confusing thing. It becomes a sense of running away from danger, Aliens is the reason why it functions well from a terroristic perspective. Or maybe not a terror. It doesn't function as a terrorist.
That's not a word. Patrick just made up a word, everyone. Terroristic. Writing it down.
The reason why it functions from a good terror perspective is because the whole thing hits those beats, right? There's almost no aspect to Aliens that are confusing and that you will have nightmares about in a way that you can wake up and not know if you're awake. Like I have nightmares about Aliens sometimes, but they're not that scary because it's more just a matter of like finding a place to hide, and if you get caught, it's like, oh fuck. But like when you have a nightmare about Alien, and you see fucking Giger's biomechanics in it, and you see fucking statues doing blowjobs on chickens and shit. It's that is horror.
Blowjobs on chickens, people. Blowjobs on chickens.
You heard it here. Blowjobs on chickens.
Anally raping chickens, people.
I mean, that's what the people want. That's what the people want. So my point being that Aliens, I think, because the whole thing is steeped in terror, I think it works really effectively on those same sort of beats that Jaws, which is also a very terrifying film, hits. And that's why I think, in the absence of the horror aspect of Alien, I think it stands on its own as in terms of pace and in terms of story beats, as something that feels unique enough to not be held down by the legacy of the film that came before it. And I agree with what you said, that some things that have happened since then, like Covenant, which is one of my favorite movies, even though I like to bring up problems with it a lot because I think it's important to do that. I think Covenant hits a lot of the same story beats, and because it is very much a horror film, I think actually more than anything since Alien in the saga, Covenant is a horror movie, which is a huge reason why I love it so much. But because it hits some of the same story points, and because we've seen it before, and because tonally it's more horrifying, I think it feels more derivative than Aliens feels of Alien.
Well, and let's even back it up further. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is Alien Resurrection. What happens in Alien Resurrection? In Alien Resurrection, you have Call, you have Ripley and Johnner and Varese escaping in the Narcissus. Well, I'm sorry, escaping in the Betty, which is very Narcissus, and it's just a smaller ship. What happens? the newborns are on board. What do they do to the newborn? They blow it out the airlock. In a
They
different
literally
way.
blow it out an airlock.
Of course, it was a much more gross, horrific way. And then you have, even I think in Prometheus, you have, even though it's not the alien that's alone with Shaw in that little hovel or whatever that thing is, that ship that they eject, it's essentially the engineer's acting the same way, where she's in this little ship where she should be safe, and then she finds out he's after you, he's coming for you. So she's cornered and alone in this ship.
And then you got the big ass trilobite facehugger thing.
Yeah,
But
which is like the queen trilobite, essentially.
It's like the queen.
Yeah,
exactly.
And then you have, fast forward to Covenant, and then you have more, essentially beat for beat retelling of Alien and Aliens. So I think that might, even for myself, color the way that I see Aliens a little bit. Like, man, almost every film except for Alien 3, which I actually, the further out we get from these films, the more I think Alien 3 is a wholly unique vision that David Fincher and the people who wrote that story and David Fincher directing it did something that the Alien series has not seen before. They made a completely different movie, not relying upon any tropes we had seen before. All the other films rely on those same tropes.
But it was by accident, which is the craziest thing of
it
all.
It was a wonderful accident, and much to the chagrin of
unique like that,
and much to the chagrin of all the fans. A lot of people are like, "Fuck that movie," But it's the most unique film since the original.
And maybe that's why we've seen this evolving fan mentality. You and I both loved Alien 3 since we were, young, but
since I was
since you were
43.
in your 50s.
And
I think it's clear, and we've talked about this, that fandom seems to be kind of turning a corner on Alien 3, and I think it's for what you're talking about, which is that it is consistently proving itself to be unique, and part of that is the fact that it, by accident and also by skill, ended up having a totally different story structure. Although, that being said, it still has the terror aspect of the whole entire chase sequence at the end, and trapping the alien. But it's all done so differently. Like the alien is drowned and overheated instead of being.
But if you think about it, like
shit.
in Aliens, and Alien. Well, I would say in Aliens, they're trying to blow it out into space, but in Alien 3, it was a complete turn on its head. Instead of the alien chasing everyone else, they were chasing it.
Right.
Like, that had not been done before. Every other film since, the alien or the engineer or whatever are chasing people. It reverted back to that trope.
Hey, look. The Sarge and Dietrich aren't dead, man. Their signs were real low, but they ain't dead.
Then we go back in there and get them.
Fuck that.
Don't leave our people behind.
I ain't going back in there.
You can't
man.
help
Make
them.
me.
You can't.
Yeah, Alien 3 has really, I think, solidified itself as a masterpiece, and I honestly think the theatrical cut is wonderful. I am not.
Yeah,
one of those
I
people
prefer
who's
the
like
theatrical.
I prefer too. That's the version that I know and love the best, and I love the assembly, but I don't feel like I need it. I feel like the actual story and the way it's constructed are unique and beautiful, and I think that it actually has played a little bit against Aliens in terms of fandom, and I think part of why you're seeing a little bit of pushback on Aliens, which is part of why we were inspired to do this whole arc of this mini series in the first place, because we wanted to talk about Aliens as a real movie. Part of why I think you've seen more people complaining about Aliens lately is perhaps because we've seen those story beats done over and over and over again, and we've started to look at it more as a sort of commercial product and less as sort of a unique artistic statement like Alien 3 is. And I think that also just the world is not the world it was in the mid-1980s. And I think that we've seen this tremendous disillusionment with a lot of we've talked about this in the series a lot, but I think that we are not a world that loves to go see, exceptionalism and sort of jingoism in space, and it's just not where we are right now. I mean, you can even look at a movie like First Man, which you and I both love, which has received pushback
Patrick
from.
hates First Man.
I fucking love you fucking
hates
hate
it.
this
And he
all the
hates the
time.
soundtrack, too.
Just because I don't have a constant boner for this movie, I fucking love that
hates
movie.
everybody, and he
I'm
hates
just
the
I
soundtrack with
fucking hate that movie. You hate Aliens. No, I love First Man. I love your mom. I fucking love the movie. But I think that it's gotten pushback from some people who I won't call idiots, although they are, that that it's not patriotic enough. Okay, for one thing, that's not true. It is clearly about an American landing on the moon, and that's a big part of it. But it's the story of one particular American person in his life. But I think that like the world is not interested in making movies like that. If First Man had been made in 1989, we'll say, I think that it would be all about America landing on the moon. It would have been much more like Apollo 13, right, where you have these brilliant American engineers and it's very patriotic and they're getting ticker tape parades and shit. And Apollo 13 was 10 years after that. So I think that the world has moved into a different place, and that could be part of why we're looking at aliens as something that doesn't feel quite as like honest anymore.
Well, and I think we're in a place where everyone wants comfort food. Everyone wants to be comforted. What do we see coming out of Hollywood? Pivoting towards nostalgia. Let's remake this. Let's redo this. Let's do a TV series about this. Let's do a live action version of this animated film, and let's do it over and over. Let's bring back 90210. Let's bring back Full House. Let's bring back all of these shows. They just announced Mad About You returning with Paul Reiser and Helen Hunt for Apple.
What?
Yeah.
I didn't see that.
So what's happening is we're losing ourselves in nostalgia. And I completely agree with you that exceptionalism, American exceptionalism, or maybe cinematic exceptionalism is dying. And I don't think it's going to die. I think there will be a resurgence of it. But right now, I think it's really hard for dynamic. I mean, I think Annihilation is one of the best science fiction films I've ever seen. But I feel like people want something more comforting than that. They don't want uncertainty. They don't want uncertainty because politically, socioeconomically, that's where we're living right now. We're living
I feel like a movie
in uncertain times, and people don't want to see that in films. They don't want to see nihilism in. Not to say that a great film is a nihilist film, whether it's a science fiction film or whatever. And I think even the waning of The Walking Dead has a lot to do with people feel like I need to feel better about myself than seriously. Yes, totally.
No, James.
Listen.
The Walking Dead is because it's fucking awful now. It's so bad. It has nothing to do with that. No, it doesn't. Okay, go talk. You fucking hate that movie.
Which movie? It's not a movie.
Aliens.
It's a show, yo. I hate aliens. No, but I think one of the reasons why The Walking Dead, the show, which used to be my favorite show on TV for a long, long time.
I was obsessed for the first 6.5 seasons.
Yeah, me too. I was there.
We used to have parties. We'd have people over.
Yeah, and then I realized I'm just seeing the same thing over and over and over.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And emotionally, I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle watching these people that I love, die, be killed off. And then, things are okay. Things aren't okay. Oh, there's another group of humans that are after us. Oh, things are okay now. Oh, they're not okay anymore. Oh, look, we're going to take Carl's eye. Oh, look, we're going to kill his mother. Oh, look, we're going to kill him. And I think that people, I have a point to this. I think that people have grown weary with The Walking Dead for the same reason people have grown weary with cinematic exceptionalism. I think that people are pivoting to something that's comforting to them. Bring in all of these shows that have been revisited. I even think the pivot in Covenant was in some ways to kind of bring people a little bit of comfort. That's where we're in. That's the look at the reception to 2049, which is an amazing film, and actually it is not derivative at all, and it has a somewhat happy ending. But it's a very uncertain film, and it's a very dank, cold, unforgiving future. And I don't think people want to see that right now. I don't think people want to see... And I think that's one of the reasons why the young adult novels have kind of had their time. Again, very uncertain futures. And I think people are at a place now where they want to be comforted. They want to be reminded of what brought them joy, what brought them hope, because that's not the world we're living in right now, especially in America, but all over the world, where you have Brexit, where you have the administration here in the country, where there's just uncertainty everywhere, and people are turning to media to bring them comfort, to bring them certainty. Like, I can go watch Stranger Things, and I can remember what it was like growing up in the 80s. Hey, I mean, I'm one of those people as well, but I also think it's affecting the kind of films that we're getting, and almost maybe to pivot back to Aliens, this love, this kind of very populist love of Aliens, because it's so comforting to us. And it's not that it isn't a good film, but I think we need to move away from it. We need to move away from Ripley. We need to move away from those things and let new, exciting, dynamic stories be told. But it's a very, very tough thing.
Yeah.
So
I think so. I do think that you're onto something with the comfort food stuff. I think that what it's more about, though, is that what people want now are more based in established IP that brings them comfort, that reminds them specifically of their childhood. But I think it's worth, I just pulled up the list of the highest grossing films of 86 when Aliens came out, and it's Top Gun, Crocodile Dundee, Platoon, Karate Kid Part 2, Star Trek 4, Back to School, Aliens, The Golden Child, Ruthless People, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. A list that is by and large comfort food, you know?
But
I mean,
only one of them is a sequel, or two of them are a sequel. That's it.
Well, no, Karate Kid Part 2,
Yeah.
Star Trek 4.
Aliens, okay.
So two of them. Okay. So you're right. So the sequelization thing is that has changed. But by and large, films that do well usually are films that bring comfort and escapism to a lot of people. So I think that, like, we're seeing a new strain of that, but I think a movie like Annihilation would have done poorly in any environment, because it's like Stalker. It's a movie that is, it's hard. It's a hard thing to market, and it's a hard thing to watch if you're not predisposed to those sorts of movies. I watch Annihilation a million times and not get tired of it, but most of the people that I interact with on a day-to-day basis have never heard of it. And if they have heard of it, many of them don't like it because they think it's slow and they don't really understand what's going on, you know? So that's a separate conversation.
But there used to be a
pivoting back to
time, though.
Aliens-
There was a time, certainly in the 80s, when there's, you know, you and I and the generation that was growing up were being raised with movies for the first time in history. Our parents weren't raised with movies. I mean, in
Right.
terms of the access that we
Right.
had to movies, that we could just
Well, at home, right?
yeah, at home, and just watch movies over and over and over. I mean, when I was a kid, I would watch a VHS, of a film over and over and over, whether it was The Dark Crystal or Flight of the Navigator or Aliens or you name it. I was watching it over and over and over. Our parents didn't have that luxury, but there was more of a willingness for audiences to go see a film that they've, cinema was still being born in a way. Yes, it had been going on for a long time, but the effects were being pushed to a new level. The types of worlds that could be created were Blade Runner. We had never seen a world like that before. Some very dynamic things were happening, and now we live in a time where you can do anything. You can make any world, and people are like, that was boring, because it's not enough.
Well, I'm just distracted by this. I've just never actually looked at the list of highest grossing films of 86, and I'm genuinely surprised that Aliens, for one thing, wasn't higher up. It's number 7, and it's sandwiched between a Rodney Dangerfield movie and an Eddie Murphy movie. I feel like when we talk about Aliens, because of its cultural legacy, we talk about it like it's this thing that just completely destroyed everything that year. But it actually didn't. As successful as it wasn't this hugely dominant thing. But I think it's worth pointing out that Aliens got 7 Oscar nominations and won 8 Saturn Awards.
Yep.
So, critically speaking, at the time, it was already hugely successful. And it's interesting, the question of whether or not it's overrated, I think, is more complicated than just looking at it from a lens of history and looking at it as whether or not it's aged well. Because I think it's worth looking at it as why we go to the movies in the first place. And I think that is the question that you have to answer before you can come to a determination about whether or not it's overrated. And the hard thing with these conversations, and this is why, the more we talk about a movie like Covenant, and the more I find ways to pick it apart and to find things that are wrong with it, the more I love it more now than I did when it came out, and I loved it when it came out. And I think it's because the reasons I go to the movies are really spoken to in Covenant. There are things in Alien Covenant that I am so madly in love with that you could fucking write off every other aspect of it, and I would be okay with that because I have a fundamental affinity for it. And I think what's hard with Aliens is that, speaking personally, I have that with Aliens as well. I feel like I could watch Aliens, weekly for the rest of I might do this, watch it every week for the rest of my life, and I will be completely happy doing that because it's speaking to something deep within me that loves film. And so it might be corny, and it might not have aged well, and it might hit story beats that we've anticipated and seen before, but somewhere beneath that, there's something very fundamental and visceral that Aliens is addressing for me personally, and I think for a lot of fans. And that's why I personally do not think that it's overrated. And I think that part of why I'm saying that is because, we've spent, the last 6 months talking about it on almost a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And I care more about it now than I did then. We went into this series talking about how we felt kind of disconnected from Aliens and about how it's something that we haven't been talking about very much, even though it's when most of the world thinks about our franchise, the one that we love so dearly, they think about Aliens because it's the one most of the people saw out there. And I think, this whole journey for me personally has been really kind of reconnecting with why that movie changed and continues to change my life so much. And realizing that, just like Covenant, I can find things to pick apart about it. I can find things that haven't aged well. I can find instances where the ADR looks like shit, and I can find instances where the color grading is off, and I can find, I think that the edition that came out in 1990 with 17 extra minutes is actually pretty dumb. I think that it detracts from the story quite a bit. I'm able to see things like that in a more honest way now and look at them as flaws that don't detract fundamentally and intrinsically from the reason why I watch Aliens in the first place. And I think the reason I watch Aliens in the first place is because it sparks my imagination in a way that virtually nothing else does. It makes me feel from the very beginning to the very end every time like it's real and like I'm watching something unfolding that is so fantastical and scary and exciting that I can breathe it and I can smell it. And the Sulaco in my mind's eye, the Sulaco is up there right now. Gateway Station's up there right now. These are real places. It doesn't even feel like fiction to me. It feels like something in my subconscious that has rooted itself so deeply that at this point it's hard to tell where I end and where this memory of this film begins. So to me, it's not overrated because it's good enough and it serves a purpose enough that it's part of me.
I hope you're right. I really do.
I would agree with you. I would echo your sentiment. I believe the film is not overrated. And I think that you really touched upon some very important things. And I think about Aliens and how exciting it is as a film. And it was born in this time of American optimism, which was the 80s, where America and the world was kind of still reeling from the places that we've come from, the 60s, the 70s. Not all was well with the world, and not all will ever be well with the world, but it was a very different time. And Aliens is a triumph because it offers such great hope. And it offers a sense of family, and I've talked about this many times, that I haven't seen done in a film since, in an alien film for sure. And we can watch Aliens and engage and see Vasquez doing the same thing we've seen her do over and over and over since 1986, and she's family. Or whether it's Gorman or even Burke and his skeeziness, it's this dynamic that's in place that does inspire me, and it inspires me that I know what good characters are, that I know what good writing is, in a way that no other film except for maybe Alien 3 of late has been able to do. And the bar was set high. And yes, we kind of opened this episode talking about story beats, and those things still are very true, but it happened in a time where it wasn't happening all of the time. It was more of a homage or a mirror effect, as opposed to, oh, they're just repeating the same thing over and over. So again, I would agree with you that I do not think that the film is overrated, but I do think as a sequel, even Aliens is talked about in circles all over as being one of the best sequels ever made, and I attest to that. I agree with that. I think it is. It's a very, very difficult thing to do, but the James Cameron, in that point of his career, had a lot to prove, and he proved it. I think it's still a high bar to reach. I think every Alien film that we might see afterwards, or say after this Disney merger happens, is going to be compared to Aliens, because that's the litmus test. Alien, it won't be compared to, because it's such a different film, which we're going to get into, in the coming weeks. But yeah, it's almost a mystery of a film, to be honest with you.
And I part of me wonders if there's a problem with that, because Aliens was so divergent from Alien, and it was so audacious and different and successful. And I think it set up this paradigm because, Alien, when it came into the world, obviously didn't have anything to build on. It was its own movie, right? But since that came out, everybody's had to build on something. And Aliens changed it might not have changed the story beats, but it changed the basic recipe, the basic formula so hugely that it set up this expectation that you kind of have to do that, or you will be compared to one of the two greatest films ever made. And Alien and Aliens are always on lists of the great films ever made, like I'm sure they're both on the AFI 100 list. So that's a huge issue, I think. And I think a movie like Alien 3, which was again, I think Alien 3 is just as divergent from Aliens as Aliens was from Alien. That took almost 30 years to catch on with people.
Yeah. Because
only now are we able to look at it as its own thing and not as something that was just sort of the destruction of what we thought we had with Aliens. And maybe we'll see that with Resurrection. Who knows? We're not huge Resurrection fans.
Resurrection. That is a bad film fundamentally.
Period. But the thing is that maybe tastes will change. And in 20 years, we'll look at it as something that was actually, that because it was so subversive and quirky and weird, actually, it was sort of brilliant. I have long said, and I still believe this really, really firmly, that Covenant is a cult film in the making. I really feel like the type of fans who have kind of swarmed around that particular movie are so into it. Those of us who love that movie, that it's something that we still dialogue about and watch all the time. And I think that Covenant it's an interesting case because it's not that divergent, although it is in some ways, but it has its own sort of mini following. It's just fascinating as time goes on to see the legacy that these movies have and how they mutate. And I think in some ways Aliens kind of fucked the franchise, and I really mean that. I feel like in being so successful and so different, it made it almost impossible to know where to go next.
That's true. It's true. How do you measure up against Aliens?
Akin to Alien, right? For one thing, it changed the basic nature of the movie, just from horror to terror, like we talked about. But it also it made it into one of the great blockbusters ever. It made it into an audience-pleasing space blockbuster, like a scary Star Wars. And I feel like unless you're going to pivot back to sort of an art house approach, then there will always be people who go, some people that I know when I went to Covenant, I went with a party of 15 people, and most of those people think of Aliens when they think of the saga, and they went there kind of wanting that, and they walked out and they were like, that was kind of scary, that was kind of weird. And so their expectations were not met because when they think about the franchise, they think about the second film. And I don't know if that's, it's not a judgment on Cameron's filmmaking, obviously, because the problem is that he did such a great job, but he also did such a different job. And I think that's something that gets lost sometimes. I want to say one thing that I do feel, well, I guess as we kind of close here, we can bring up a couple things that we do think are overrated. If that's okay with you.
Yeah, I had essentially one final statement I wanted to make. We can talk about it, though.
Okay, well, I'll go quick because I only have one real problem with the movie. And before I get to that, I want to bring up one thing that I was going to mention a while ago that I forgot about, which is I talked about how I think that the Queen's reemergence in the fourth act is ridiculous. I think it's a testament to how amazing the film is that the power loader sequence is one of the great scenes in film history. And like you couldn't have that, and you couldn't have the last 10 minutes of the movie, which are just some of the fucking great minutes in filmdom I've ever seen, without that ridiculous thing. So it's an example of something that is out of nowhere and kind of dumb, and you can make fun of it, but it's justified because the whole train is just fucking amazing. It's going so fast. Okay, so talking about being overrated, just briefly, I will never be okay with the changing of the nature of the xenomorph into a hive organism where there is no fear of an individual and the fear is just from the collective sort of organism. To me, that is a deep enough alteration to the way that I think about xenomorphs that I kind of hate it. I hate when you see the alien that gets crushed under the wheels of the APC. Like, I hate that. I hate how, you can shoot him once, like Hicks can shoot an alien with a sawed-off shotgun once in the head and it's just gone. I hate the fact that they're, by and large, human-sized, that most of them are played by actors who are, 6 feet tall and move more or less like, people move and are kind of stocky-looking. I think that, as we've talked about many times in the show, and as we're about to talk about a lot in the upcoming series, part of the strength of the saga, and especially of the creature, is its alien aspect in terms of being strange and being something we don't have a paradigm for to talk about. And Aliens kind of ruined that in a lot of ways. It gave us the big answer, which is the Queen, about who's laying the eggs and where they're coming from. It gave us aliens who you can beat with a handgun. You can shoot them in the head and they're dead just like they were just like some sort of a, criminal, like a human, and they are, by and large, not you look at them and you immediately know how they move and how they operate. They're not balletic. They don't feel like dancers. They feel more like bugs. And that, if you're watching the movie for the Marines, that's a good thing. But if you're watching the movie for the Xenomorphs, I think it kind of screws them up a little bit. And I think that is something that I hold against the movie every time I see it, is I wish that they weren't so disposable and so interchangeable. I love how Big Chap feels like a 360-degree character in and of himself. He's so scary because you can't stop staring at him and wondering what the fuck is going on with this beautiful, terrifying thing. And aliens, they kind of run by and they get shot and they die and they're just like any soldier would be. And I think that it is too human and it's not scary. And I think that is an overrated aspect. I kind of don't like the Xenomorphs in the second film.
That's interesting. I would say, actually, I'm going to maybe surprise you. What I think is overrated, or what is the idea that Aliens set up this expectation where most fans, or maybe a lot of fans, just want to see that aesthetic repeated over and over and over. They bring back the Marines. Bring back the Marines. And I've talked about this before, maybe people just, they want something to believe in. And maybe that's true as well. But I also feel like it's set up the series to fail in some ways. How do you beat it? And I don't approach films like that. You just have to make a good film. It's not about being better than the film before it if you're a sequel. It's about being a good film on its own. But because Aliens continues to be that beacon for everyone, where I feel like Fox has always historically been, well, how do we make another Aliens? How do we get another Aliens? What do we do? What do we do? And it's just not working, and it's not working, and it's not working. And I think it's hurting. Not that what James Cameron did hurt the franchise. I just think that it's a fickle thing. It's a hard thing to create a sequel to Alien, and they did it, and they were successful. I mean, just in the same way Blade Runner 2049 is a miracle of a film. How do you follow that up? I don't know. I don't know if you can follow 2049 up. And so the question has been posed, how do you follow Aliens up? Well, let's try Alien 3. I think it's a masterpiece. A lot of people are like, no, fuck that movie. It was not a repeat or an encore of things that they loved from Aliens, and that's what was failing. So let's try Alien Resurrection. Let's bring Ripley back. Let's bring some Marine type people back. That film fell flat on its face. Let's try Prometheus. Let's try AVP Requiem. I mean, all of these films, these experiments they're attempting, they're all not working. And I think Aliens tends to continue to be the loudest voice, and it's going to take another miracle to create something that can breathe on its own and not rely upon the legacy of films gone past.
But see, what's hard, though, is you're saying two different things. Like, you're saying that it can't rely on the legacy of films past, but you're also saying that part of the problem with everything since then is that they've been kind of all over the place.
Well, I think they've been trying to rely
on film quality.
Well, they've been trying to rely on the films of the past. Like, they've been trying to recreate elements of Aliens over and over again because they think, oh, hey, that was successful. Let's get Joss Whedon. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's do this. Let's do that.
Right.
Even Covenant was. I mean, and we've talked about this before in discussions on Covenant or whatever, like just these beats, oh, look, he's looking into an egg again. Like, we're seeing these same things over and over and over. And I think that there's a way to tell a story that's wholly unique that honors what's gone by, but tells a completely new story.
But see, to me, that was even before I knew that he wanted to retcon Alien 3, which I didn't know the first day I saw the concept art for it. That has always been my problem with the Blomkamp film, which is it feels like it is just kind of a retread of this thing that I kind of thought
I agree with you. It's taken me a while to get to that.
Trying to move away from it.
Yeah, it's taken me a while to, but that same I don't know, how do I describe that? The same criticism I have for people wanting more of the same in an Alien film is exactly what I wanted from Blomkamp. And it took me a while to really see that. Like, Jamie, he's just giving you more of the same. And it's not something new. He's retreading, or even he's kind of pivoting back to this other familiar place as opposed to telling a new story. And I think you're wholly correct. But I also think a lot of that.
But even more than that, though, he's also erasing things. He's trying to erase things that we've journeyed through together as a fandom together over the last 2 decades, right? Like, trying to erase the hard reality that is Alien 3. And that the last thing I want to point out is it's become increasingly clear to me over the last few years that I've been involved with this show and more kind of intimately with fandom, at least with social media fandom. There are two camps in Alien fandom. There are alien people and there are aliens people. And I'm not saying that you can't be in. Obviously, here's the thing. Obviously, we are all in both of those camps. Nobody listening to this is like, oh, I fucking hate one of those movies, but I love it. Right? We all love both of those movies in a really deep place. A deep enough place that you're sitting there driving your car, listening to us talk for 2 hours about a movie, that we've gone well over 100 episodes talking, right? Like you love it the way we love it. We everybody involved with this loves both of those movies. But there is a fundamental decision that we all make within our hearts about which of those we prefer. And I think I don't think that there is anybody out there listening to this who, if they're really being honest with themselves late at night, has a hard time deciding which one they love more. I think at some point you become an Alien fan or you become an Aliens fan fundamentally, and that guides everything else about your interactions with fandom because you start looking at it through a different lens. You look at it fundamentally as the story of Ripley alone against the universe, or the story of the colonial Marines against the invading hordes. And depending on what you like, you will constantly be butting heads with the other camp. So for me, I love Aliens so much, but I love Alien more. So when I see the Blomkamp art, and I see it, because Alien 3 to me is akin to Alien. It is taking the formula back again to this idea that there is this one monster in a haunted house, right? It's a very different story, but it is a monster in a haunted house, and Ripley is alone, and we are seeing her character compressed into a pearl, like we are seeing her under so much pressure that this incredibly beautiful thing emerges, which is this lone, heroic, wonderful character. And so to me, like, people who love Alien are usually the same people who defend Alien 3 a lot. But there are tons of people, probably more people, who have constantly been wondering why we didn't get more aliens, because that spoke to something deep within them that they expect out of an Alien movie. So for them, the Blomkamp thing has been consistently frustrating, and I have tremendous empathy for that, because if you've been waiting for 35 years to have Colonial Marines again, and to have Ass Kicker, and to have, smart guns, and to have all this shit, and somebody says, oh, we're going to give you more of that, and what's more, we're going to pretend like Alien 3 didn't happen, and we are making a legacy decision and saying that Alien fandom is fundamentally Aliens fandom, and then that was denied to you, yeah, I would be really upset too. But to me, it always felt sort of like it was being wrenched away from me, like this, like the first film and the third film, which I have always loved more than the second film, were being kind of written out of existence because the priority was on the one that made the most money and was the most universally beloved. So I think that's something that's fascinating. The last thing I want to say, and then I'll shut up, is I don't pretend that I am on the Nostromo. I don't pretend that I'm on Fury 161. But fuck, I love pretending to be a Colonial Marine. With the kids, when I was a kid, I love the idea that Aliens speaks to something really imaginative within me and something very childish within me. In that a lot of the, you know how I'm fucking ridiculous with the toys and with the collectibles from Operation Aliens and things like that. That is a huge part of my self-identity. And that is Aliens, and I think that in that way, there's no way that I could ever say it was overrated, because it's given me universes of imagination within myself that I didn't really have access to before it, and I will not. So as much as we can argue about the direction of the prequels, and as much as we can argue about the Blomkamp situation, and as much as we can argue about James Cameron being interviewed on the the Akita red carpet. Alita. Sorry. Akita, whatever the fucking movie was. A terrible movie.
Such a wonderful
As much as we
phrase.
can argue about that, like, I will never, till my dying breath, I will never ever take anything away from Aliens in any deep way, because it has meant so much to me throughout my life. And I am so forever grateful to James Cameron, to the Skotak brothers who did the effects, to Ray Lovejoy who edited it, to Adrian Biddle, the cinematographer, to obviously to O'Bannon and Shusett who gave us the characters, and then to Geithner and Hill who did the story with Cameron, to Galen Hurd, to everybody who made that movie, let alone the incredible actors on set every day, and the technicians who brought the fucking puppeteers who brought the Queen to life, the people who constructed the sets. It is a movie that was made by a huge group of people working at the absolute peak of their imaginative powers. And whether or not it's aged well, and whether or not it represents what I think about when I think about Alien, it is something that my life would be poorer in a measurable way if I didn't have it. And I think that's a big deal. And I fucking love that movie.
I echo your sentiments. I would say the difference is I do imagine myself as an explorer on a ship. I don't imagine myself as a Colonial Marine ever. What intrigues me about the Alien series is the idea of a forbidden planet, of going somewhere we haven't been before and discovering, almost like being an early, discoverer of Earth, whether it was Amerigo Vespucci or whoever. That's when I envision the Alien universe, or I think of myself in relationship to that. I think of what it would be like to explore an unknown place. But again, to pivot back to your sentiments, I would not have survived my childhood or teenage years without Aliens. Ripley's story in Aliens got me through, and then when I met her again, she got me through again in Alien 3. It is not overrated. It is a miracle, a masterpiece of a film, with incredible effects and acting and everything. It was just a cocktail of something beautiful that has created a kind of a rich tapestry that we will always talk about, and we're going to end up talking about it again.
I'm sorry if I scared you. That platform was just becoming too unstable. I had to circle and hope that things didn't get too rough to take you off.
Bishop, you did okay.
I did.
Oh, yeah.
We are lucky to have a fan community where there is room for people with different opinions, and where we can always have this fundamental argument, and where we can love each other more for it, because we recognize that we all come from places of real shared passion and love, and even if we don't agree, we're fucking lucky to have these movies to talk about in the first place.
I agree. I think we are a part of a really wonderful fan base and fandom, and just the podcast, and that we have the opportunity to talk about these films and share our love and our knowledge and our hopes and our dreams. It will always be something special, no matter how much sometimes work it might be to get our episodes or whatever, or planning. I would not want to be doing anything else than what we do. So
thanks, man. Thanks, guys.
All right, folks. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for
Bye.
part 2 of this discussion, which is going to be a roundtable. So that's coming up eventually. For more on Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast, please visit perfectorganism.com. Perfect Organism is available for listen or download through Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, and Spotify. If you'd like to support the show, please visit perfectorganism.com/support. Thank you.